Let's go back over procedures and we're going to write a few. So I'm in a file called procedures.py. Doesn't really make any difference what you call it. But let's first do the syntax. Once again, we have a keyword. So you have def for definition and then the name. And the name has to meet the same requirements as a variable name. And then there's these parentheses, and then if you're going to have parameters in here, whatever they might be, close that paren. And this could be empty. This part could be empty. And then you have your colon, which begins, of course, a code block. And so you have your code block below here. And that's it. And typically you'll have a return statement. So let's say that your task is to write a procedure that takes in 3 integers. And then it returns the sum of their squares. You might begin by saying, well, def sum of squares, and then A, B, C, and then do your stuff. But quite honestly, especially if you're a little confused about how all this works, I say don't even begin there. Just do something in the module you have. So right now we're in procedures. And we have to write this as a procedure. But before you even do that, forget that. Just think about what's in the meat of the procedure. Just what are you doing? You're summing the squares of 3 integers. So you can just write in here, just say, just to test it out, A equals 2, B equals 3, C equals, I don't know, let's say 4, okay? And you want to sum the squares. Well, the sum of squares, give it an awkward variable name like that, is what? It's just A, and then to square in the mathematical terms. There's a number of different ways to do this, but the simplest is double asterisk 2. That squares it. And then you add it to B's square, then C square, right? And that gives you, right, what you want. So if we print that out, now, just to do a, let's say that should be 4, right? The square of that should be 4. The square of that would be 9. And the square of that is 16. So that 16 plus 9 is 25 plus 4 is 29, right? I think I have that right. 16, well, I'm sorry, 16 and 4 is 20 and 9 is 29. That's a better way of thinking of it. So if I ran this, and it's got to be saved first. And if I ran this, Python procedures, boom, 29. And I'm going to repeat this here, but just in case you missed it, this is the same kind of environment as Replit. On this side, you have your coding environment, and here you have what would be a console in their case. Or actually, it's the shell in their case. And to run it, I don't use this run button in this context because it's kind of a pain. It's not that efficient, I don't think. And besides, I think it's good to see how these things operate under the hood. In Replit, this is actually what's happening when you hit the run button. It's doing the Python command followed by the name of the file that you're running. Mostly that's main.py. But anyway, there you go. So let's leave that aside and let's look back over here. So we have to write a procedure that does this. It does this. It takes these things and returns that. So how do we do that? Well, you can say def, say sum of squares, we'll call it. Now, you could do this to start it off, right? You could take all of this and just move it into here. Now, it's got to be tabbed over because you're in a code block and you got this, right? You got that colon that tells you that anything below it has to be at least 1 indentation or whatever it is, 4 spaces over, 3 spaces, however you configure your environment. So I just tab it over like that, okay? Now, we could do this and then return sum of squares, but that's, it's not really what you want to do. We can get rid of that and just say return that, right? Now, this procedure suffers from the problem we've dealt with before, which is you've hard-coded in the values you're going to, what they are and what you're going to square, etc., what you're going to sum up as squares. Well, that really doesn't work, and that defeats the purpose of having a procedure. One of the reasons you have a procedure is that you might do the same thing but with different data inputs. Well, what are your data inputs? Well, they're up here in your where your parameters go, or when you're defining it. And what would those be? What changes? 3 integers. Well, these are the 3. And you don't give them values up here, typically. I mean, there's a way to do that. But so there, A, B, and C. And then we could say, we don't have to have any of this, because these will be the variables that are fed into here. So what does that mean? Well, let's get rid of this, because we don't need it. And it all seems kind of abstract at this point. But my point really in doing all of this was to show you that don't get hung up on this syntax. Just perform what you need to perform and then dump it into a procedure and then figure out, okay, what are my variables? What are going to be the arguments or the parameters that are going to be varied whenever you call this procedure? Well, it's going to be 3 different integers, and they give A, B, C. You could call them whatever you want, really. So now you have that, and let's do a couple things. One is, let's call it, right? So we say, let's say, we'll just call it the first time. We'll just say first, and we're going to plug it into a variable, sum of squares. And here we can put 2, 3, 4. I should put a space there to be clear. Don't have to, but we're going to second equals sum of squares. I'm sorry. Sum of squares, and here we'll put 4, 5, 6, right? And we can print those out just to see, but we really should sort of run some tests as well. So one thing you can do is you can say you want to test it out. So you could say, you can use a Boolean, right? You could say, well, is this true or, so I would say first should double equals, right? This 2 squared plus 3 squared, squared. Actually, you don't even need, you could put a space like that, but I don't like to do that. It's easier for me to read. Plus 4 squared, right? It's the sum of those. So if I'll print that to see if that is, so what it should do is just give me a true, and it does. So this tells me that this is my little test here, and I put a Boolean in and say, is this the same as this? And you can do the same thing with second. I could take this, put it in there, and here it'd be 4, here it'd be 5, and here it'd be 6. Well, 6. And if I ran that, it should also be true, right? So that gives me some satisfaction that my procedure is operating as it should. And then from there, I use it whenever I need it. Now, sometimes the mistake people make is they don't realize when they're inside the code block that is the procedure and outside it. Here we're outside it. How do we know that? Because we are flush here with this. That means we're outside this code block. This code block ends right here, and I'll put a comment. End of procedures code block. Okay, so you shouldn't have anything. This should never, if I did this, that would be interpreted by the interpreter as being inside this code block. This comment has nothing to do with what the code block. So it sees this and it thinks, oh, that's what you want to do. You want this as part of the procedure. And why is this grayed out? And this brings up an interesting problem, or an interesting attribute of procedures. When you have a return value, anything after that is ignored. So this would be completely ignored by the interpreter. Why? As soon as it hits return, it throws back whatever the memory was asking for. And it says, okay, I got what I wanted. It could not care less about. This might as well be a comment. It'll never reach that. It says, in fact, it says code is unreachable. And our little linter tells us that. So you shouldn't be calling, there is a thing called recursion in which you call a function from within a function, but that's a whole other, the same function within a function. In fact, we'll do that later on maybe. But this is calling a function right here. This is implementing it. Do not make that mistake. And if I see you making that mistake, I'll think, you're just not paying attention. There was one other thing, but I think we'll stop right here, and we'll deal with that later.